Welcome to today's teaching. By the way, you might just hear dogs and hardy-dars and all kinds of things. We can't silence the noise of animals or birds. But I've prayed that there would be an ability to concentrate. I pray before I turn the mic on because I pray for a lengthy period and we don't have that much time. I'm trying to keep these teachings down to 15 minutes or just a few minutes over 15 minutes to make it easier for you to watch. But today what I'm going to be doing is actually picking it up from the teaching I did last week. And I'm looking at the importance of the Word of God. And last time I did a certain amount of teaching, and I know not everybody will have watched that, but I do encourage you, if you're watching today and you didn't watch last week's, to go back and watch it. But today I want to speak about how incredible it is for us to have the Bible accessible to us at all times. You know, God, when he gave the word to Moses inscribed that word at some point. So from Genesis to Deuteronomy, we know that was the law. It was everything that was God-breathed. Well, everything in the whole Bible is God-breathed. But that was what the children of Israel had at that time. And that was the law. And of course, then they had the prophets as well. But it was absolutely imperative for God that the people knew what the word said. And so it was required in the law that every 7 years, the priests and the Levites had to read the whole book of the law aloud so that everybody in Israel knew what the word said. And, you know, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about all the different sacrifices they had to read about and all the different laws. And imagine hearing that only once every 7 years. And when you consider that, I've got a bookshelf full of Bibles. Of all kinds of different versions, and I've got commentaries, and I've got Bible dictionaries, and many other study helps. But I've got the Bibles that I read, and then of course on my iPad and on my phone, I've got the YouVersion. If you don't have the YouVersion yet, I encourage you to download it. But the YouVersion gives you, at the press of a button, you can actually access, I don't even know how many versions of the Bible that there are. And if you want to look at a particular verse and you want to look in various versions of the Bible, then all you really have to do is just change the whatever translation it is. And we are just so abundantly blessed with the Word of God. And my deepest desire, as somebody who loves the Word of God, would be to see every single person who is a Christian taking advantage of the abundance of the word that is available to us and reading it. And not just reading it, but to meditate on it and then to see if there's anything that we can do to live according to it. You know, even though the people in the Bible, the Israelites, in the wilderness and then when they moved into the promised land, even though they only heard the whole word read to them once every 7 years, nevertheless, they were told that when they walked along the road, they were to speak about it to their children. They were to inscribe the word on the outside of their doorposts. They were to, the word was something that they had to put on their physical body so that it would be emblazoned on their hearts. And it's just incredible that over the years, that was something that fell away. And it was as one evil king took over from the king before him. If he was somebody who didn't live according to the word of God, then the word was never read to the people. They didn't even know what it was, so they couldn't talk about it. Because there was really only one copy of the word, and that was the one that was kept in the temple. However, God had made a requirement that every king who came to the throne had to actually write out in his own handwriting. He couldn't delegate it to a scribe to do. He had to write it out in his own handwriting, a copy of the law, so that the priests had a copy of the law, but so did the king. And then it was his responsibility, not just the priest's responsibility, to see that the people lived according to it. And the interesting thing is that after they'd gone into exile and came back to the land 70 years later with the group of people who were willing to come back, leave the comforts of Babylon and come back to Israel so that they could rebuild the temple and rebuild the wall around Jerusalem and settle in the land once more. One of the first things that they did after the wall was completed was to get Ezra the scribe, and they built a platform for him. And he had to get up onto this platform so that everybody could see him, and he had to read the whole, they read it from early morning till noon. And, as the people heard the word being read, they'd start to sob, because it was just so important for them to hear the word after so long of not hearing it. And then the Levites moved among the people and they explained parts that they hadn't understood. But now just getting back to the pre-exile, when they were still living in the land, and where the kings, the bad kings, had neglected the word of God. And so over a period of time, there was absolutely no record of the word anywhere. And we get to a time when there is the best king in the Bible. I mean, I know that David was a fantastic king, but it says of Josiah that there was never a king like him. And Josiah was just very, very young when he came to the throne. He was only 8 years old. But it says in the 18th year of his reign, he really began to press into God in a new way. And you can read all of this you can read it in 2 Kings chapter 22, and you can go on into chapter 23 to read about Josiah. But it says in Josiah 22:1, Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. But in the 18th year of his reign, he did something extraordinary. Well, obviously God was moving upon his heart. And when the people came to the temple, they used to bring money, and the doorkeepers would take the money because there were requirements for their giving. And so the doorkeepers took the money, and it says that what Josiah did was he actually sent the secretary, his own secretary, to speak to the high priest, and he said, "What I want you to do is I want you to collect all the money that has come in and that the doorkeepers have collected. And I want you to give that money to the carpenters, the masons, the bricklayers." I said bricklayers, not exactly bricklayers, but anyway, it says, "Have them entrusted to the men appointed to supervise the work on the temple. And have these men pay the workers who repair the temple of the Lord, the carpenters, the builders, and the masons. Also have them purchase timber and dressed stone to repair the temple." And then there's a verse that I just love. And how I wish we could say this of people today. He said, "But they need not account for the money. They need not account for the money entrusted to them because they are acting faithfully." So they were so honest and worked with such integrity, they didn't even have to give an account of what they'd spent the money on, which is a wonderful, wonderful testimony. And when they went in to repair the temple and they started to clear it out, because the evil kings before Josiah had brought all kinds of foreign altars and things into the temple that needed to be cleaned out. And when they did that, when they were busy cleaning out, they found a book, the missing book, the book of the law, that the high priest took it to the secretary and he said, I found a book. And so the secretary, whose name was Shaphan, he read the book and he realized that it was a book that the king needed to know about. And so he took it to the king and he read it aloud to him, and Josiah was absolutely appalled. It says in verse 11, let's read verse 10. This is 2 Kings 22, reading from verse 10. "Then Shaphan the secretary informed the king, 'Hilkiah the priest has given me a book.' And Shaphan read from it in the presence of the king. When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his robes. He gave these orders to Hilkiah the priest and to the secretary, etc., etc. And he said, 'Go and inquire of the Lord for me and for the people and for all Judah about what is written in this book that has been found. Great is the Lord's anger that burns against us, because our fathers have not obeyed the words of this book. They have not acted in accordance with all that is written there concerning us.'" And so this was the most amazing It was the catalyst for the most amazing reforms ever seen in Israel. Just by hearing the word of God, it horrified him so that he actually ripped his clothes. And he went, we haven't been living according to this. And you can read on about it, and I encourage you to do that. I don't have time to go into all of it. But he started reforms. And he actually tore down every high place. He burned the bones of the false prophets on the altars. He defiled everything that was evil, and he reintroduced everything that was good. And then he stood at a pillar, called all the people together. He stood at the pillar of the temple, and he read aloud the book. He read it to the people, the king did. And then he renewed the covenant with them. And just in reading that, my heart has always been touched by this. And I thought, if only our hearts would smite us, if we were doing things that weren't pleasing to God, and maybe we didn't know that, but when we read about it in the Word of God, it would smite us. And, I need to say this, that we all have to be accountable for reading the Bible ourselves. As somebody who has been in ministry for well over 40 years, I can tell you this, that I have preached, and I've got well over 40, I've got about 45, how many, Renee? About 48 sermon books. And those books are full of sermons, because there are very, very few that I've ever preached more than once. And I know that even preaching as much as I did and teaching as much as I did, I was unable to teach on everything, like maybe once every 10 years. And sometimes people would say, you really need to teach on this, Fiona. You really need to teach on that, Fiona. And I knew that that was true. But you can't preach on everything. And so for us as Christians, just as regular churchgoers, we need to read the word for ourselves. And if you read Proverbs, it tells us how we should live. If we read Psalms, it tells us how we praise and tells us about who God is. But we also need to read the New Testament. Paul was very strong on the Word of God. Jesus said, if you abide in me and my word abides in you, then you'll be my disciples. And he spoke about us abiding in the vine. And the only way we abide in the vine is to stay in the Word of God. And so I know that my time is up. And so that's all I can say to you today. But please be encouraged, because God has allowed us to live at a time when we don't just have the Bible in our own language, but we also have it in a colloquial language, which is like a paraphrase. But I need to say here, please don't read the Passion Translation. There's a lot that's wrong with it, and a whole lot that's been added to the manuscripts. So please don't read the Passion Translation. But any other translation, feel free to read, and I can recommend the Living Bible, the New Living Translation. My favorite, of course, is the New International Version. But read it, and in that you'll find that God does miracles in your life. God bless you.